Welcome
to the Grow People podcast. That is Pastor Jason. He's back, and he's wearing a very cool sweatshirt. My name is David Stein, campus pastor at our Canton location. The purpose of the Grow People podcast is to help
grow people.
And I think we clipped it. You haven't said that in a while.
No, I would like to apologize to all of our podcast listeners.
Listeners. I've heard it both ways.
Listeners. We missed our last podcast. We actually had a humdinger one planned.
Yes, we did.
As well.
Yeah.
But that week, I think that was the week I actually got, we were supposed to record on Wednesday and I got the flu on Tuesday.
Right.
So yeah, I knew. Yeah. I could have come in and recorded if it was just my hip because I could have sat here. Mm-hmm. But getting the flu, I was like, no, I can't spread that around. So.
We will save that humdinger of a podcast.
Yes.
For next time.
We will.
For next time. I don't think it ever goes out of vogue.
No, it doesn't. No. And especially this year being a election year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm already seeing a lot of commercials about it.
Yeah, we're not going to get political. We will get biblical.
Biblical.
Yeah.
That's right.
So how's your January going?
Man. January has been another humdinger. I'm trying to think of another adjective. Is humdinger an adjective? Is that what you would say?
I think it can be used in so many ways.
It's probably a noun. But yeah, I was trying to think of an adjective to describe that. It has been a wild one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've said this obviously from stage and videos, but it's been the roughest start to a year. I would say in my life,
mm-hmm.
But that's, I don't know if that's true, but it definitely feels like it. Because like I said, I injured my back, which again, that wasn't a big thing. And even now people keep asking me how my back is. My back is fine.
Right.
But when I did that, it jacked up my hip. And then that is what caused me all the pain. Because I was able to preach the first weekend of the year and I had already injured my back. I was 7 or 8 days into it at that point. But then that next week, it messed up my hip and caused a hip impingement. And that was some of the worst pain I've had in my entire life because it was bone on bone crime. Like it was, my femur was locked in and then it messed up. Like still dealing with a lot of nerve pain. But just when I started to try to felt like I was getting better, then got the flu.
Then the Cowboys lost.
Oh, we're not even talking about that, David. Come on. That was just misery. That's typical. But even the flu, like I don't normally get sick that often, but like this was worse than having COVID when I had it.
Yeah.
Because I had the shakes and the body aches and the chills. Never really had much of a fever, but then I lost my taste, and it was a rough 3 days. And then through all that, found out that my blood pressure was really high. I actually gone to an urgent care place before I really knew what was going on with my hip, just because I needed something. Like I was hoping to get like a cortisone shot, just to relieve the pain. And I went to go get that, and they were like, "No, your blood pressure is too high. We can't give you that because it'll mess up your blood pressure." Like, what the heck, And then they gave me some anti-inflammatories, which also raises your blood pressure. I didn't know. So then I'm taking that,
right,
and now trying to check my blood pressure every day and deal with being sick with the flu. So it just like the hip hits just kept coming, and both of my kids had gotten sick. Lindsay had gotten sick. And so this has been going on since the last week of December, as far as sickness and pain and everything else. And then I had to go to the emergency room, which, no one likes going to the emergency room. And, I'm not afraid to go to the doctor. I don't mind, but I'm always like, if I injured I don't have to go to the emergency room. Like it's not that big of an emergency, but when it's your heart.
Yeah.
So thankfully, obviously with that, they got me in quick. And Northside Hospital, I don't know, everybody has different experiences with it, but all the nurses were great. So many of them go to our church. And so they were helping take care of us. Even like you and Leanna came up there and you're supposed to have like one person in the room, like, no, y'all come on back. Getting us chairs to sit down. And so they were fantastic. And then saw something in my EKG and they were like, you got to follow up with a cardiologist. And So then I'm like, oh my gosh, now like I'm really anxious, like which isn't helping my blood pressure.
Sure.
But again, by God's grace, was able to actually get into a cardiologist within 3 days. And then they did tests several tests that same day. And then another one last Friday. So I had an echocardiogram, a renal stenosis, which is the vein or the artery going to your kidneys, checking that out. And then I had nuclear stress tests. But the funny thing about that, like, that's normally done on a treadmill.
I have had that done. Yeah.
Yes. I did it back in 2018, just as like a part of a executive physical thing that I did. So I knew what that was like. But then I told the doctor, I'm like, Doc, I can't run. Like, I can't even walk right now.
My hip.
Yes. So that's where it just started like compounding. And so he's like, that's fine. We can do it with medicine. But I will say, and I don't know if I've told you this, but the one that they do with medicine was the weirdest feeling of probably my entire life.
Yeah. You texted, you thought you were going to die.
Oh, because, they hook you up to an IV and first they inject radiation in you, so they can take pictures. And so that's a little trippy, but
because normally we're supposed to stay away from that.
Exactly. And so it was kind of it's a weird thing because you go in, they hook you up to the IV and then they inject you with radiation. Well, then you have to sit there for an hour for it to circulate through your body. So I'm just watching TV, drinking water, just chilling. Like, I'm like, oh, this isn't bad, Well, little did I know, So then they go in and take pictures and then I go and lay on a bed and then they have to inject me with radiation again. And then they give me this other stuff. And he tells me, this is going to open up every blood vessel in your body. Like open it up to where basically blood is like freely flowing through your whole body. Well, what that does and I was telling a doctor friend of mine, he's like, oh, that's what they said. I'm like, it takes your heart off prime.
Oh,
like your heart is beating and
okay.
It's good. That's prime. What takes it off prime? Because basically when every blood vessel in your body opens up, your heart's like, holy moly, I got to now pump way more blood.
Okay. Wow.
Because it's all opened up, And so just imagine like, if it's a constriction, it's opened up, but your heart's trying to fill. So it's got to pump a lot more volume, And so they tell you that, like, you probably feel some chest discomfort, like just take deep breaths and all that kind of stuff. Well, they hit me with that. And I mean, within seconds, within seconds, my entire body, like, feels flushed. The only way I can describe it is that feeling when you get when someone knocks your breath out and you have that panic.
Yep.
Like I can't breathe and I can't do anything to breathe. That's how it felt, but weirder. It felt like a heart attack. That's all. And again, I've never had one, but it's the only way I can describe it. And I had to like really focus. I felt like I needed to pass out, but I had to take deep breaths. And even the tech, he was like, are you okay? I'm like, oh, like it was the weirdest feeling I've ever felt in my life.
Wow.
And they do that again to open it all up to see the blood flow and stuff. Again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm trying to describe it. And so then I had to lay there for another 30 minutes while they're running all these tests, And then he's like, all right, you're done. He's like, but don't get up fast.
Don't worry, Doc.
And you can't take any caffeine prior to this for 12 hours because that speeds up your heart, which I'm fasting from coffee, amongst a lot of other things. So I'm like, I'm good on that. And I hadn't been really eating hardly anything. And I had told him I was fasting because they want you to eat a snack after that and drink Coke after this test, which I don't know why. But I told him I was fasting. He was like, well, we don't have anything that fits your fast and you're not drinking, coffee. He's like, or caffeine. So I can get you water. I'm like, give me water and some crackers, like some, I got to have something.
Yes.
Like I had to not cheat, but
I think that would have been a moment where there would have been a lot of grace for a Coke and a pack of Toasties.
Yes. No. Well, and I will say during that 30 minutes laying there, I was praying a lot. I was feasting on the Lord a lot.
I bet.
because it's just freaky. I mean, it's just the weirdest feeling. And which again, I've never felt before because I could normally do the treadmill. But anyway, thankfully got that done. They took more pictures and stuff. And then I had my follow-up this week and all the scans were good. As far, they're mostly checking for blockage. And he said that all those scans check for a major blockage.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have any major. He said, if there's something minor in there, they couldn't see that. He said, but even if it was minor, they wouldn't do stents or something.
Right.
It's only if it's major. And then I had a little bit of thickening in the wall of my heart, which could be hereditary, because my grandfather had that. But he said also could be caused because of the high blood pressure, because my heart was having to work harder. And just like any muscle, when you work it out, it gets bigger, but you don't want that with your heart, So the prayer request now is, and I'm on medication to get my blood pressure down, which I haven't historically had high blood pressure. Right. But because of my injury, and then I injured my knee last year, I haven't been working out, and when you're not working out, you're not eating as well. So obviously, clearly now I've got to lose weight. Because again, I wouldn't say I haven't felt like I'm unhealthy. Like I still work and do stuff and, active. I haven't felt really limited by anything. And I know I'm a big dude, but I didn't feel like I'm like this massively overweight person. But again, you know how it is. Like they're still healthy.
Sure.
So I definitely have to work, which is good. Again, I think that's a good goal and I have motivation to do that. And if we can get my blood pressure down, he's going to put me on a different medication just to get it down even more. Cause it's still borderline even with being on meds. And he said that thickness could reverse back over time as my heart's not having to work as hard. So that's good. So anyway, I mean, the good thing is all this craziness of my back, my hip, nerve pain, the flu, led me to figuring this out.
Yeah.
So I can be grateful for that. So my goal now, obviously, be healthier. And that's one thing too, and even my doctor who's been working on my hip, he's a believer and knows I'm fasting. He's like, how are you fasting? And I told him, I was like, basically fruits and vegetables, I'm not eating meat. And he goes, well, it'd be great if you could eat some fish or some.
Well, yes, it would. Doc.
Yes. Yeah. I'm like, no, it would. And some protein. He's like, cause that's going to speed up your healing. And I normally take like omega-3s and stuff. And so, but I hadn't been. So we bought those. I've been eating a little bit of fish again and fats like avocados, trying to get that, which, cause it helps my joint and helps my heart. So again, I feel like now I know what's going on. I have a plan and God has been so gracious to provide people, even like the doctor I've been seeing for my back and hip is a guy that goes to our church that I didn't even know.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to know him and great clinic and a lot of believers there. And then again, going to the ER and a lot of our church members there. And then getting into the doctors. I mean, God has just been gracious through all of it to let us know that he's there. He's with us. I was able to preach last weekend, which was fantastic. I just had to have a stool, which thank you for.
I brought a stool sample.
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks for bringing
It was literally the only time in probably everybody's life that anybody could literally call it a stool sample because we were in a creative meeting and anybody's like, hey, does anybody have a stool we could use? Do we need to order a stool? I said, well, we have a couple of different stools at home. I can bring one in and see if. And it just that's a sample.
Yeah.
So
you can sample it. Yeah. So David brought a stool sample and it worked. Yeah. That was the stool that I used.
It did. And it was, and I know this was not planned, but it was such a fatherly position that you were in where you were just kind of standing a little bit. Then you'd sit and then you'd pastor our church and you'd pastor us and father us. And there was this moment where I was like, man, he needs to break out the stool more often. but it was, I think it was really important that obviously the church sees you.
Yeah.
But also it's such a critical point in our church to have a message like that.
Yeah, that was the toughest thing of this. And again, Chad and you did a great job. And we want to develop other teachers, and so I think that's fantastic. And even our student guys and others, like we have, people that teach in different gatherings and stuff. So that's a value we have to multiply, just like everything else, multiply teachers. And so we try to be very strategic about that. Like not just, oh, Pastor Jason can't do it, so someone's filling in. So we like having other teachers. But yes, to your point, the beginning of the year, Abide is a big thing. It's church-wide, kids, students, and adults. Like it's a all hands on deck kind of time. And so obviously during that time, it is strategic for me to be here and to speak and lead that. And this year, I was probably the most excited I've been in a long time.
You were.
About teaching it. Because, we've done Abide now for a minute. We've done it for a while. And, sometimes it's like Christmas and Easter. You're like, I've already talked about that, But the whole vine and trellis concept, I was super excited about that. We were going to talk a lot more about that. And so I was really bummed. And again, I mean, you and Chad did great, but I was kind of grieving. Like I couldn't talk about what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. And you were grieving not being with God's people.
Yes. And so I was just super excited about that thematically. So next year, don't be surprised if we take that route again and hopefully build that. Because I wanted to get into that. I wanted to get into developing a rule of life and those kind of things and having rhythms. And because I do think that's kind of the next iteration for people in our church is not just to, in fact, we were talking about this in my small group on Monday, not just fast only during this time, but develop a rhythm of these disciplines in your life.
Yeah.
And that's why we do it. But again, the Lord knew all that and, there's a reason for it. Even a guy in our church, and I told him I give him credit for a friend of mine named Kevin. They started coming to church here back in 2020 when we did the Welcome to the Wrestle series. And I was talking about Jacob and God injuring his hip. And he texted me, he's like, well, there's another time in the Bible where God injured a guy's hip, I was like, you know what? I haven't even thought about that yet. So again, I can see that in my own life about, it's been a wrestle, and I haven't physically wrestled with God like Jacob did, but even in this injury, God is good and the wrestle is necessary. And I have to learn to welcome that in my own life and learn from it. So
I do want to get into that a little bit. The season of Abide, the growth of our church, which has been dramatic.
Yeah.
Christmas, the largest gathering of a holiday we've ever had.
Yeah.
More people than Easter.
Yeah.
The record numbers of people that came in January. Overflow on a Sunday, which has never happened.
Yeah.
You're down.
Just on a regular.
Yeah. You're down for the count.
Yeah.
Not the first time during Abide that you've gotten sick.
No.
And so have you wrestled, to use your word, have you wrestled with the spiritual component of that?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Like one of our guys in Jasper, who I've known for a long time, and even before he was a part of our church, he texted me about 3 weeks into this, and he goes, next January, we're putting you in a bubble. Because, this is 2 years in a row now where I've gotten sick. And again, I don't normally get sick. And so, you start to look at it from that perspective, and we'll get into this in Ephesians 6 when we talk about spiritual warfare. I'm not the guy that thinks that every bad thing that happens in my life is because of the devil. If I had a flat tire, sometimes it's just a flat tire, but I am a guy that believes that God is sovereignly over everything.
Yes.
And even though he doesn't cause evil, everything goes through his hands. And so there's nothing that's happening to me that's outside of his control. So if it's happening to some degree, and I don't even like this word per se, like he allowed it, because then we ask the question, well, why didn't he stop it?
Mhm.
You know, and I get that when bad things happen, that's a fair question. But my natural instinct isn't to think that God is somehow punishing me.
Mhm.
And it's not to think that Satan's just attacking me. That's not kind of where I go in my mind at first. But I think it is good to ask, okay, but God, what are you trying to show me
Sure.
in this?
Mhm.
And clearly this didn't catch you by surprise.
No.
Clearly you want to use this in my life. You know, Romans 8, he wants to use it for his glory and my good. Even though in and of itself, it's not good.
Mhm.
So in my own mind, I think it helps me. I try not to get too worked up about it from an anxious perspective, because life just happens. You know, these things happen. But when it starts to, like, for example, if I had just injured my back, I'd be like, well, it's because I didn't use my legs properly. Like, that's just a mistake. It happens. But then it starts to tweak my hip to the point to where I can't stand and then I can't preach. Then you start, okay, is there more to this?
Mhm.
You know, sorry, I still have a lingering cough. And then when it keeps going and then I get the flu, so I can't stand or barely exist. And then I'm going to the ER. You know, when things start to kind of progress like that, and you do naturally start asking more questions like,
Mhm.
God, again, I don't ever want to blame God or feel like he is somehow abandoning me, because I just described how he hasn't. He's
Right.
been with me. But I do think clearly God allows us to go through these things sometimes because there's something we need to learn. And there is a spiritual component, you know, that the devil uses to discourage,
Mhm.
to make us anxious, you know. So there was definitely moments. I mean, there was definitely moments when I was praying, Lord, like, you've got to take this pain from me. Like, once I knew it was a hip impingement and they fixed, like the doctor told me, he was like, we got one or two options. I can fix this right now, but for the next 48 hours, you're going to hate me
Mhm.
and you're going to be in so much pain, but that's the quickest way. Because I basically have to re-injure this to fix it. It's like a doctor breaking your bone to reset it,
Mhm.
kind of thing. Or we can take the slower route where we can kind of massage it and, you know, like
Right.
literally and slowly fix it. And I'm like, Doc, I don't have time
Mhm.
for that. He's like, well, I would recommend the first route. He's like, but just remember, you know, what I told you. And that was on a Friday morning.
So I want to give a warning in case you're faint.
Yeah.
if you're prone to fainting,
Yeah.
these next 30 seconds are going to be a little tough.
Yeah. And I promise I won't cuss on here. But yeah, when he basically had to pull that out, you know, like literally
So grab his leg.
Yeah, grab my leg, and they're holding me down and like pull that hip impingement out, because basically it's the femur was jammed up too high
Mhm.
into my hip joint, and so they pull that out, and there's a loud pop, and it's funny, like the moment they did it, that didn't hurt, like that although it was weird, but because there was kind of an instant relief.
When you say loud, you've shared that before. This loud pop.
Yeah.
Can you describe that pop?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's, you know, the sound like when you pop a knuckle, like
Okay.
other people can hear that.
Yes.
Like it's not just you
Right.
hearing it,
Uh-huh.
but that's you know, like your knuckle's a pretty small joint.
Yeah.
So just imagine that louder
Okay.
and deeper.
Okay.
So Jackson was in, my son, because my son had to
Mhm.
drive me. He was in the room. He heard it.
Okay. So
You
I
know.
didn't know if it was like a balloon popping but no, a knuckle cracking. That makes sense.
Yeah, but just like it was deeper and louder, you know,
Mhm.
not quite as loud as a balloon
Mhm.
popping, you know, but it was like, holy, you know, but then that night, that was a Friday morning. So Friday night, Saturday night, worst pain in my entire life. I couldn't sleep. There was no position I could get into.
Mhm.
Prior to that, I could at least sit down or find a position to where I wasn't hurting, but this, no. And I was, you know, taking every pain pill that you could think of or anti-inflammatory, nothing, you know, and he told me, he was like, none of that's going to work because this is your bone. And so that night Friday night, I woke up like 2 a.m, And I was so restless in bed, couldn't sleep. And so I had to go downstairs, and I was in bed, or I was in my chair just crying and praying like, Lord, take this from me.
Mhm.
Again, not to compare to Jesus and what he dealt with in the garden, but just that complete desperation, of crying out to God. And that's when I think in my mind, I realized, or I felt like the Spirit, like that's the first time in a while I was that desperate, for God.
Mhm.
Um, but for God to do something, and that's when I realized, well, this whole part about abiding is like, I need to be that desperate for him,
Mm.
on the regular. So it was in that moment, that morning at, 2, 3 in the morning, where I started to feel like, all right, Lord, there's more to this, than I realized. This is more than just my back and hip. This is more. And this was even pre getting the flu. And so, and we'll talk more about this, this August is our 20-year anniversary as a church. And we've got a lot of things we've been praying about and planning, kind of thinking about the next 20 years. So I do feel like, I don't think it's a coincidence now that here we are at the beginning of the year and thinking about plans and future, that God was reminding me, yeah, but apart from me, you can do nothing.
Oh, that is excellent. Because that was one of the questions I wanted to ask. What we're in Abide, and I know you are fasting, but you've had these trials, at times insurmountable.
Yeah.
What has God been saying? Is that it?
Yeah, I think that is, and even and it's like what I preached on this last weekend. Because as I shared, Lindsay and I have been doing this Bible reading plan, and I don't always like those. One, because I don't like the year-long ones, because I feel like I can never do them. Then it becomes about doing something, and then you feel like a failure.
It's the box checking that I talked about.
Yes, and so, but Lindsay and I decided, it was funny. We were talking about this season. I was like, "Hey, do you want to do a Bible reading plan with me?" And Lindsay's like, "That's the sexiest thing you've ever said." And I'm like,
"How you doing?"
Like, who knew, man? So, guys out there, ask your wife to do a Bible reading plan with you. So we did it on the Bible app, and you can like she sent an invitation, so now we can see each other's progress, make notes. She can see so it's really cool. Like, it's a really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Which the cool part about that, before all this stuff, is coming off of my sabbatical last year that we talked about on here. The biggest realization then was, I live by this mantra of I don't need you, which has been a huge revelation for me,
right.
And it has started to change my marriage and just my life. And it's funny, even the doctor, we were talking last week, and he has this written, Lindsay, it laughs at me because he has it written up on his window. And I was explaining to her, and I was acting like the window was actually here. And I was saying, so his 4 keys to health, and again, this is what he does. And he's a strong believer, but his number 1 key to health is relationships. Number 1. And he's like, that is the one that is over everything. He's like, I don't care what else you do. Diet, exercise, sleep, like relationships is number 1. And he was like, obviously, first and foremost, relationship with God and relationships with others. He was like, that is the key to happiness, to health, everything you want in life. And he was like, obviously, I don't have to tell you that. I'm like, oh, preach it, brother. But that has been so. And then it was like sleep, exercise, and diet. In that order. So all that to say, relational. Like, I've been on that kind of journey since my sabbatical of like, I can't do this by myself. Well, now I feel like that lesson is going deeper in the same way with God. My relationships, just like I talked about at church, like the whole idea of rules in a relationship, like Lindsay and I have rules in our relationship, rhythms in our relationship that help enable the relationship. But we don't think about that when it comes to God. We separate the rules in the relationship. We just see God's commands and rules as something he wants us to do. And, relationships aren't about rules. And again, like, we kind of create this false dichotomy. But as I said, rules actually enable the relationship, the structures that enable the vine, the branch and the vine to grow. So yeah, that's what I feel like God has been saying in my life in this time is, Jason, the reason why need these spirit, like the reason why you're, like I said, to conform my actions, the reason why you do that is because that's what enables you to abide.
Mm-hmm.
And so clearly I think God disabled me in some spiritually strategic ways in my own life, because I'm a doer. I like doing things.
Right.
Like my first instinct is not to pray, and my first instinct is not to connect relationally. It's like, let's do something. But when you can't do anything, so I was completely dependent on the Lord. I was completely dependent on Lindsay. So many people, friends, others texting, hey, if you need something. Well, normally when someone says, hey, if you need anything, and I don't say this to them because I don't want to be rude, but my first instinct is, I'm not going to text you.
Mm-hmm.
Why would I text you? Like, I don't need anything.
Right.
And not even from a prideful standpoint. Like, I don't mean that pridefully, but that's just my default.
Mm-hmm.
We did a series years ago preaching through Galatians, talking about living by design, not by default.
Right.
So I feel like this year for me, Abide has been a redesign, again, of like, Jason, you have to abide in me. You have to remain in me. And that whole cloud analogy or picture, I think is great, is now I'm not going to move until he moves.
Amen.
And when he moves, I'll move.
Mm-hmm.
So relationally, and it was funny, we had some friends here from Scotland that are a part of the church planting work that we're doing there. And he was even having a conversation with his wife coming to church on Sunday because they're here in town. And so they wanted to come because they live in Scotland half the year, live here half the year. And he said, I just was telling my wife, I just want God to tell me the next steps. Like, I want him to lay it out. I want him to give me, this plan. And he was like, so thanks for the message, but it's not what I wanted to hear, And obviously he was being a little cheeky, but his point was, but I needed to hear that, because if God laid it all out for us, then we'd be like, thank you. And we'd take off.
Mm-hmm.
If he's like, we're going here, here, and here, then we would leave the cloud.
Yep.
We'd leave the presence like you talked about. So I think that is the thing that God is saying, Jason, and I think he's saying to our church, obviously, as well. It's like I said on Sunday, apart from him, I can do nothing. But if I abide in him, I'll lack nothing.
Excellent.
So we get to choose our nothings,
Mm-hmm.
Do I want a life where I can't do nothing, or do I want a life where I will lack nothing?
Right.
And again, I think that's why God does these things, to remind us of the necessity of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. So in this month, you have been spending time in the presence of God. And something I said a couple of weeks ago in the sermon, which was, when you're spending time with God, your conversations will be different.
Yeah.
So this conversation that we've had for the last 33 minutes, obviously there was quite a bit of medical stuff in the beginning, but very little about what you were fasting from.
Yeah.
All you said was fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
That's what you're eating. And the wonderful pack of crackers that you had. Were they peanut butter crackers?
They were.
From the Lance family of snack crackers?
I think so. They weren't the orange ones.
Okay.
Which typically I like the orange.
Those would be those would be the toast cheese.
Yes.
Yes.
No, the orange with peanut butter.
Yes, toast cheese.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that what it is?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't like the crackers with cheese.
No.
But these were the round ones.
Yes.
Yeah.
The toasties. They're the round.
Yeah.
There's the toasty, and then there's the darker one. It's the malt.
Okay.
I'm a fan of the malt.
Let's not talk too much about this because they're still fasting.
As you know, if you get our text and app notifications, we did a snack drive for Macedonia Elementary School.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing liquids for these 3 weeks. And literally outside of my office are
boxes
and boxes stacked to the ceiling of salty, crunchy things.
Yes.
So, okay, well, let's go back to your conversations. Our conversations will be different when we are spending time with God. And I've had so many rich conversations with people in the last couple of weeks of what God is doing in their lives through this fast.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's okay to be hungry. That's the whole point. We're hungering for God in our hunger pains.
Yeah.
We're saying, God, I want you more than I want this food. I want you more than I want this social media. And the message on Sunday, and I've heard people say this, God sometimes speaks in stereo.
Yeah.
And the message Sunday reaffirmed something that I have been struggling with. So when I got saved, and I don't think we ever talked about this on the podcast, 16 years ago, I have called it a hijacking.
Yeah.
Jesus hijacked my life.
Yeah.
And when you're hijacked, the person who is doing the hijacking takes control.
Yeah.
And takes you in a different direction.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And then you are not in control.
Mm-mm.
You can't get off that bus. You can't get off that train. You can't get off that plane because it's going in a different direction and somebody else is in control now.
Yeah.
So that's how I lived my last 16 years, whether it was, what about this opportunity? What about this marriage?
Yeah.
What about just, Lord, I've been hijacked. I'm just going to hold my palms up and go where you tell me to go.
Yeah.
And just say yes. My yes is on the table would be another way to say it. All through my time here at Revolution for the last 9 years. You want me to do what?
Yeah.
Okay, my life was hijacked. So I was always using that analogy. Well, here we are 2 weeks now from Kenya.
Yeah.
We're going to Kenya. There's a team going to Kenya. 6 years now, you've been saying, hey, let's go to Kenya. Steve Cascia from Serve International, let's go to Kenya.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. And we were supposed to go in 2020.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. So
we were supposed to go, we went in 2020. We were
Okay.
supposed to go in 21.
okay.
Yeah.
So that did not happen.
No.
So we get to our first team meeting for this trip to Kenya
Mhm.
a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And everybody's sitting around a table over at Serve International, and Steve Cascia says, hey, let's go around the table and talk about why you think God's leading you to Kenya.
Yeah.
And everybody had these unreal spiritual answers.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they weren't real.
Yeah.
They were just
were good.
they're beautiful.
Yeah.
And powerful. And I don't have that.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to say, well, Pastor Jason wants me to go. So I've been wrestling with that.
Yeah.
So my prayer going into Abide was, Lord, tell me what you want from me. Why am I going to Kenya?
Mhm.
And then I decided, okay, I'm going to do a liquid fast. I'm going to read Genesis.
Yeah.
And however far I get, if I only stay in Genesis the whole time,
Yeah.
that's good. I'm going to read it slow. I'm seeing things I've never seen before.
Yeah.
You know how many times the word number 7 is used?
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. And so I'm reading about Noah. I'm reading about Moses. And I'm just kind of going along the fast and doom-de-doom-de-doom, not hearing anything.
Yeah.
Sunday, and I shared this for 15 seconds in the hosting on Sunday, that I got here at 7:15. And if you've been to our campuses, you know that we have a flagpole.
Yeah.
And I park directly behind the building.
We don't have one in Jasper yet. We're getting one.
Okay, there's
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I park directly behind the building, but off to, I'm in the distance.
Yeah.
And all I could see was the flagpole and the sky.
Yeah.
The sky was gray and the flagpole was gray. And on our flagpole is this big white flag just flapping. And I'm not looking at anything other than, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I should take a picture, but I'm a terrible photographer.
Yeah.
And for 10 minutes, I'm staring at this flag. And then it hit me. Okay, well, that's the flag of surrender.
Yeah.
Okay, I got that. Okay, this is what you're saying. Go back to my first love.
Yeah.
Go back to Jesus hijacked my life.
Mhm.
Took me in a different direction. Took control. I can't get off this train. Every time there was an opportunity to do something here, I would say to Leanna, can't get off this train.
Yeah.
So I'm reading about Noah. I'm reading about Moses. Moses didn't know why he was going up that mountain.
No.
I even preached on that. Moses just goes up there and God says, hey, hang out for a while.
Yeah.
Which means be still.
Yeah.
And Noah is building this ark. And there were probably a lot of times he's like, what?
But I'm not doing this.
But he was obedient.
Yeah.
And then he said, move when God moves.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, he's saying, I don't need to tell you why you're going.
Yeah.
I don't need to have this big revelation of this is how spiritual this trip is going to be. He said, go.
Yeah.
He said, be with me, go. I'll let you know why.
Yes. The land I will show you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, so many people have shared different stories. So when we have our Abide Nights, if you're listening to this before our Abide Nights on February 2nd and 3rd, we're going to have a place out in the lobby where you can share your stories.
Yeah. Come give us some video testimony.
Yeah. We want to hear what has God been saying to you? Maybe it has been in stereo. Maybe it has been through the preaching of rules and relationships. Maybe it's been something completely different. Maybe you've been asking God to answer a particular prayer and he answered it.
Yeah.
And maybe that was a yes, and maybe it was a no.
Yeah.
Maybe he's protecting you from something. So I think this has been a really cool season, especially going into the 20th anniversary of the church.
Yeah.
The growth of the church. We're trying to figure out stuff too.
Yeah.
That's why we've moved some starting times around. That's why we're considering all kinds of different options to make sure that people have a seat, to make sure that they are being discipled, to make sure that they are cared for.
Yeah, and that's the principle. And you said this yesterday when we were talking about it, but you see that all throughout Genesis. Yeah, just do this. But I'm not going to give you the reason. I'm not going to give you the answer. Like Abraham, go to the land I will show you. So, and same with the cloud and the tabernacle. Pack it up.
Yeah.
Where are we going? Well, you'll know when we get there.
All the campers sitting in the congregation, they were like, oh, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
That was a great image of, okay, you get to wherever you're going, you unpack, you put the tent up, the kids are screaming, nothing's going up the way it was supposed to.
Yeah.
And then the cloud moves.
It moves.
And you got to pack it up again and get back in the family truckster.
Exactly. And God didn't say, again, I think we put all these expectations or I think we see ourselves, I don't know, I don't mean this even negative, but I think we see ourselves as equal with God, but it's in those moments where we're reminded we're not part of the Trinity. God doesn't counsel with us. And that's what God told Job and all of that Job dealt with. God said, who are you? Like, I don't counsel you.
Yeah.
You're not in the counsel of my will.
Where were you when I made all this?
Yeah. Where were you when I did all this? I don't need you. And God's not being mean and cruel when he says that. He's just reminding us he doesn't owe us. Like, he doesn't owe me an explanation why I went through this. He doesn't owe you a reason why he's telling you to go to Africa. He doesn't owe you any of that.
No.
And I think we forget that so much because it is relational. But again, God's not being mean, but by God doing it that way, it forces us to remain relational. Because in our minds, we're like, God, I need you to tell me this so then I can decide whether or not I'm going. And God's like, well, that's not how this works.
That is so good.
I just told you to go. And the only thing, and just like he told Moses, just like Jesus said to others, go and I'll be with you. Well, that's all I need to move. That's the only thing I need to move is move when he moves and know he's going to. That's all I need. And I've always tried to live my life that way, and B, lead this church that way. Even thinking about this 20-year anniversary, and sometimes it can frustrate even our board sometimes, even some staff sometimes. And I don't mean frustrated like they're mad at me, but I think naturally people look to me in my role and they say, where are we going and when are we getting there?
Sure. And
that's fair. That's okay. But sometimes I have to tell them, I don't know yet. Like, I'll know when I know, Now, again, that's not an excuse to make bad leadership decisions. I'm not saying that. But especially over the last couple of years, like with COVID and coming out of that and everything, we didn't know. I mean, there were times we didn't even know who was a part of our church and who wasn't, and were we going to be okay, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that blew up a lot of people's perceptions. I honestly blew up a lot of people's sense of safety
Yeah.
in their own life,
Mm-hmm.
which is a good thing to a degree. Obviously, I'm not saying I want chaos in the world, but it's good to remember we make plans, but the Lord determines our steps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so I have really tried to live that way in my life, which is, and I joke about it, and even said it on Sunday and Thursday about, you know, when Lindsay and I got married, you know, I was like, hey, if you're not willing to live in a hut in Africa, don't marry me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know where I'm going. I just know wherever he's going, I'm going. So Lindsay and I have always lived our life that way. I can't tell you where I'm going. I can just tell you who I'm going with, you know. And I think that's a powerful principle for us to learn how to live that way. Again, it doesn't mean we don't make plans. It doesn't mean we're not strategic, you know, even in my own life, you know what I mean? Like I save, I give, you know, I have retirement, I have kids' college. I do those things. I live my life with as much wisdom as possible. And in the church, same way. Like we try to manage the church well, financially, relationally. We try to make sure, but where we're going as a church, what this next 20 years look, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that keeps us dependent upon the Spirit.
That's right.
You
That's
know?
right. No, and I've seen you make decisions based on the Holy Spirit moving or saying, wait, be
Yeah.
still. And I think that's healthy for our church.
Mm-hmm.
And you've shared, you know, a little bit about that on in some of the messages over the last couple of years. But when we see, and I just want to encourage you, it's encouraging to us when we see the person leading our church, and as a steward of the church, wildly encouraging to see the person leading our church listening to the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely. And I think that's the power. Again, if we really realized, and obviously we'll never fully understand God until we see him. Even then we won't understand him fully, but we'll know more. As Paul says, we see through a glass dimly now, then we'll see with unveiled face. So I can follow God. Like I don't know everything. But the good thing is I don't have to know. I remember telling our staff one time, and it freaked out one of our staff members in a bad, not in a bad way, because we talked about it, but I made a comment one time. I was like, you know, anything that we do, I'm about 51% sure that's the right thing to do. I mean, unless it's a moral question, you know what I mean? And when she heard me say that, she was like, oh, I just thought you were a lot more confident in what we were doing. I said, well, don't misunderstand what I'm not saying. I'm 100% confident in God.
That's right.
And I'm 100% confident in his word. And whatever his word says, we're doing. But the longer we follow God, you know, when we first start following Jesus, you're talking about like 16 years ago, it was like, well, do I do drugs or do I not?
Yeah, that was an easy one.
That was an easy one because there's a moral a dimension to that between good and bad, wrong and right. But the longer you follow God, it's not between right and wrong as much as it is between better and best. And sometimes where the Spirit moves you, where the cloud moves you, on the surface will look worse. It won't make sense because God will say, like to a Gideon, hey, reduce your army. Hey, do this that makes no sense. Paul talks about this in Corinthians when he's like, basically what he says is if we follow in Jesus, we're out of our minds.
Yeah.
We're foolish, you know? So I want to be foolish in a sense of like, I'm just foolish enough to go where God goes. But I don't want to be a fool though and make bad decisions. You know what I'm saying? That's not what I'm saying, because the biblical fool is not a good thing to be.
No.
You know, repeating the same mistakes, making bad decisions, that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think there is an element to our faith that feels foolish because I just have to rely on the Spirit, you know, and I just don't know. I don't know where all the time. I don't know when. Again, and we try to make plans, and staff have asked me, hey, how many campuses are we going to plant? When are we going to plant? I don't know. You know, I just want to I want to be a part of a church that's building a culture of multiplication
Mhm.
where we are multiplying disciples and
Mhm.
artists and leaders and groups and teams and campuses and churches, so that when God says go to Scotland, when God says go to Africa, when God says go to Woodstock or wherever, we're like, yes, sir,
Yes, sir.
we're ready.
And the church knows it. So when there's multiplication happening, when there's a missionary move,
Yeah.
as you said, the church is like, oh yeah, that's what we do.
That's what we do.
Yeah, we are a multiplication church. It's not a surprise that 300 people are standing up, being commissioned and sent.
Yeah. And it's funny, Chad and I talked about the weekend that you preached that we announced that we were moving the gathering times the next week. Well, we didn't announce it that week, but following that week, we announced it. Or whenever, I can't remember. Maybe it was
that week.
Yeah, whatever it was. But Chad and I were having a conversation that Sunday. I said, Chad, this is normal for us.
Mm-hmm.
Like it hasn't been normal for us post-COVID. I said, but this has been normal. I mean, well, to some degree, yeah, because even post-COVID, we started Thursday night.
Right.
It's normal for us to move times. We have done that in our 20-year history, and definitely my 14-year history. I mean, I can't tell you how many reiterations of gathering times we've done.
Mm-hmm.
We've moved them all around and started them and taken them away and all that kind of stuff. I said, Chad, this is normal for us.
Mm-hmm.
And he made a good point. He was like, that's a good thing we need to remind our church of, because there's so many people in our church that are new. They don't know that's what's normal for us.
Right.
Like moving a gathering time from 11:15 to 11:30, or asking people to move to Thursday, or asking people who live in Canton to move to Jasper. That's what we do. That's who we are.
Mm-hmm.
That's Revolution. And to your point, that's who follows God. That's Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Move.
Yes.
I'm moving. Move. And so from that perspective, I think that's the thing that God has been speaking, obviously you, me, I think a lot of people, is I am with you. So abide in me and move when I move.
Mm-hmm. So many people have moved from Saturday at 9:30. I'm sorry, Saturday at 9:30.
Sunday.
We don't have a Saturday. I watch cartoons.
We've never done that. We've never done a Saturday at 9:30. We used to have Saturday nights, but
the people who have made that missionary move from Sunday, whether it's 9:30 or 11:15 to Thursday, I know that there's a reluctance to do that because there's this tradition. There's this is what we do.
Totally.
We go to church on Sunday and then we go to brunch. We go to church on Sunday and then we cut the grass. Whatever that is. So it is different, but it is a sacrifice and it is a move.
Totally.
And when we get ready for I had a meeting this morning. Believe it or not, I had a meeting about Easter this morning.
Yeah.
And we're figuring out what are we going to do with all the people that are going to be here for Easter.
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure out, okay, here are our times. This is what we're doing. This is where we're going to have overflow. We're going to be asking people to go to Saturday. Going to Saturday, moving to a Saturday gathering for Easter is different.
Totally.
Especially if you have family in town. This is going to be weird.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're making that missionary move to make that sacrifice for someone else to sit in your sacrifice.
Totally. We actually talked about this in our small group on Monday, because there was one of our guys who's actually been in the church longer than me. One of our board members, actually, he was talking about, he was like, man, coming on Thursday is weird. He said, not because Thursday, he said, but when I wake up Sunday morning and I don't go to church.
Yeah.
He's like, it feels wrong. Like he goes, I've been doing that for 50 years. It feels wrong.
We get that.
And then it was funny. Somebody else in the group was like, well, you could serve on Sundays.
Hello.
They actually attend on Thursdays, just attend, and then they serve one gathering on Sunday. And so they were like telling him, like, well, you could come Thursday night, but Sunday morning, just serve.
Yeah.
Serve at a gathering. I was like, yeah. And it was funny. They just hadn't thought about it from that perspective. But I say that to say I recognize, if you attend on Thursday and then you don't attend on Sunday, it feels like you're breaking a rule. Again, talking about those rules. But I think that's what we have to wrestle with. Though.
Yes.
Like, you think, does God care if I attend on Thursday and not on Sunday? No. As long as I'm gathering with the people of God and I'm part of the community and I am making a move, I'm serving, I'm considering others better than myself, and I'm not putting my preference over others. I'm making room for others to come. Well, then God is in all that, clearly that's how Jesus lived his life. Clearly that's how the first disciples learned to live their life. So yeah, I think it's good for us to remember all of that. And God, and those are the things that I think that like you said, the more time you spend time with God, your conversations change. Well, then also your actions will change.
Yes.
You
yes. So if you've been spending time with God in Abide, and you referenced this in the sermon on Sunday, do not neglect meeting together as is the habit of some.
Yeah.
Hebrews chapter 10. There is a long history of starting strong, just like at the gym.
Totally.
And there's no doubt we've started strong in Jasper, in Canton.
Yeah.
And if you have been spending time with God, I just want to encourage you. Your life happens here at church.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get connected, if you're not on a team, if you're not in a group, if you're not here, you're not going to be connected. But
no. And there was, go ahead.
But if you want that deep connection, do not neglect gathering, as is the habit of some.
Totally. And I think that's a great way to say that, and maybe even kind of to wrap this up. But I get we're busy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got young kids. Kids play sports and life, and I get it. Like even Monday night, you know, because I was at the cardiologist Monday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsay and I had small group that night. We're like, I just want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been at work, I've been at the doctor, you know, but you have to make sure I'm neglecting the right things.
Yes.
This is a good, I need to neglect the right things, but I don't need to neglect the things that are right. And I think what so many people in our culture today do, because and I get it, they work, sometimes working multiple jobs, they have kids, those kids have sports, and none of those things are bad. But none of those things should lead you to live a life of neglecting the right things.
Mm.
Because let's be honest, what is the lesson you're teaching your kids?
Yeah.
That it's okay to neglect the gathering of the church because of sports?
Mm.
It's okay to neglect them. Because which one of those is going to be more fruitful in their life?
Mm-hmm.
You know, God and his people,
Mm-hmm.
or a sports team?
That's right.
And again, no shade on people who play. Both of my kids, my son played college football, but he didn't miss church.
Yeah.
You know, and the proudest thing I can say about my son is he loves Jesus,
mm-hmm.
and he's done with sports.
Amen.
You know, and sports wasn't his savior. So you're going to neglect something. You have to,
mm-hmm.
you know, and it's just like in life. Just like I said, it's a rule. You know, the rule that Lindsay and I have that makes our marriage succeed is we don't date other people.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm neglecting that part of my life prior
mm-hmm.
to marrying Lindsay. But that's what enables me to have what I really want, which
mm-hmm.
is a fruitful marriage. And so, yeah, I think it's important, like you said, not just start strong, but make sure coming out of Abide, you're not neglecting the things that are right. And you do neglect the right things. Like you say, and I love how you said it, you're making a commitment that my life will revolve around Jesus. And if my life revolves around Jesus, then my life will revolve around Jesus's bride,
mm-hmm.
the church. So I'm saying yes to Jesus. I'm saying yes to his church. And we're not just doing this from an attendance standpoint, because if there's another church that you like better than Revolution, fine.
Yeah.
I told my neighbors that. I had an HOA meeting on Saturday, which
mm-hmm.
also is not great for my blood pressure,
mm-hmm.
you know. But a young couple there came to our church for the first time on Sunday, and I told them what we say all the time: hey, we'd love to have you at Revolution,
mm-hmm.
but just because we're neighbors,
mm-hmm.
if Revolution isn't for you, you can still be my friend. Like we can still be neighbors.
Yeah, they were on our first time guest list, and I talked to them on Sunday.
You good
in the afternoon? They said, "Yeah, Pastor Jason's our neighbor, and he invited us." I was like, "Go, Pastor Jason."
Yeah. So, and I told him, I'm like, I just want you to be in church.
Mm-hmm.
Like if Revolution Church is not it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Please don't ignore me because you're afraid of hurting my feelings.
Right.
Or, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're saying. Like, and I think that's why I love Abide. It is a recentering of our life on the priority of abiding in Jesus, gathering with his people. Now, again, sometimes you can't help it. I get it. But I would hope for our church coming out of this that you do make that commitment not neglecting to meet together
Mm-hmm.
with Jesus and his church,
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to produce the life that you want. It's going to produce a fruitful life. And that's why we're starting the young adults gathering that we're starting, because we're trying to implement that principle in their life of gathering together. So we're super excited about that's coming up this Sunday.
First Sunday of the month.
Yeah. We'll have a gathering. The third Sunday, we'll have a small groups. So we're trying to build that principle into people's lives. And it is very encouraging and exciting to us to see people coming to church, and it's exciting to figure out how we're going to fit them all in, and more gatherings and more campuses. You know, the Lord has blessed us, and we're super, super grateful for that. But again, it's not about Revolution Church growing and getting bigger. That's not the point. It's about the kingdom of God expanding. And I just want our church to prioritize coming out of this abiding in Jesus and in his people.
Excellent. Excellent. Great way to wrap up the first podcast since you have returned, and it is great. It's so great to have you back. For a transcript of the show, just write down everything we say, unless you're watching on YouTube, where there is a transcript. Who knew? Our producer is Brian Damerow. Our technician is Neon Kian Sadiji. Our videographer, the master of the, movie, is Marcos.
Polo.
There you go. Our key grip.
We didn't discuss that. I'm assuming that's what you wanted me to
That's
say.
what I was going for.
I'm sure he's never heard that in his life.
Never. Our key grip is Jakub Pushakowski. Our head of doctrine and theology is theologian. Our chief evangelist is salvation. Our backsliding prevention officer is lukewarm. Our director of Swedish witnessing is Bjorn again.
Bjorn's my favorite.
Our expert on Russian eschatology, Peter Vel. Our director of holiness is mortification. Our staff counselor, been busy lately, Les Moody.
She seems to be busy a lot.
Yes. Our giving coordinator, Generosity. Our director of tithing is 10%. Our nativity coordinator, she's from France. Her name is Beth Lechem. Our co-pastors of Plagues, Manny Locust and Lance Boyles. Our Irish eschatology professor, Mark O. the Beast. Director of communications is Bernie Bush. Our sabbatical director is Trip Long. Our... just giggle at that. Our director of marriage studies.
It's a trip.
From Romania, Shizma Betterhoff. Shizma Betterhoff. Missional expert Sam Aria, our resident Trinitarian Holly Spirit, our strategist for the final batter.
You're making a lot of food references
I've heard it.
here. I don't
I've
know
heard
why.
it both ways. Pancakes would be great to end fast.
Eggs.
Armageddon is her name. Our resident sheep tender. He only wrote in December. He only works in December. I don't have my glasses on. Nathaniel Ivety, Nativity. And our resident prayer warrior, here's the new one. I can't believe it took us this long to figure this one out. Resident prayer warrior, kneel down. There you go. And finally, the best advice ever.
Trust God, take it out.